Erika Viking Häger, Head of Corporate Sustainability and Risk Management at Mannheimer Swartling. Thank you very much, Erik and Erika. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. A pleasure to be here. Yes, I will speak to you about information and cybersecurity. I had the honor of heading a government inquiry for about 2 years on this field. And it's interesting. The background is very positive. The background is positive. Sweden is fantastic. When it comes to harnessing the opportunities that information technology brings about, this is the ranking according to Davos, the World Economic Forum, 2016. And we take the bronze, just ahead of Norway. I should say the background is mostly positive, because when the same entity look at the countries that are best prepared against cyber attacks, we're not even on the list of top 20. So when it comes to appearing to be prepared against cyber attacks, Sweden apparently does not impress. It's as if we have behaved like this character Morpheus in the Matrix, not taking the threats and the challenges seriously. Now, this is not only a government problem. I'm sure we're not all to blame for this. But in fact, when the Civil Contingencies Agency in Sweden a couple of years back probed the government agencies, it turned out that more than a third of them did not have any rules for risk analysis when it comes to information security and cyber security. More than a third did not have rules for risk analysis. So we have been slow for some reason in rolling out rules for these agencies. Now, on the left-hand side, you will see a report from a government inquiry in 2005, and on the right-hand side, you see the report from the inquiry that I headed in 2015 and concluded in 2015. They both put forward proposals for rules to try and rectify this gap that Davos has spotted. But it's not until June this year that the government adopted an information and cybersecurity strategy on the basis of the proposals that we put forward. And the government, I should say, also immediately started the actual implementation of several of these measures. Now, in the inquiry that I presented, I put forward 6 strategic goals that are now reflected in the strategy, and I will focus on one of them that I thought was relevant for this particular panel, namely the need for the government and the public sector to act and to be seen to act as a skilled procurement demandeur. Now, under this goal, I proposed 5 different proposals, measures. Let me go through them quickly. First of all, as we all know, there are standards for information and cybersecurity, and thanks to the GDPR, we are likely to see more standards being developed in the future. Now, my proposal is simply that public procurement should be conducted in light of and with reference to relevant standards. So far, this has not been a requirement. The second proposal I put forward is for an agency, such as the Civil Contingencies Agency, to be mandated to develop protection profiles, 6 or 12 or what have you. There are 448 government agencies in Sweden, and the needs are different between them. The needs of the Swedish Tax Authority are decidedly different than those of the National Swedish Handicraft Council. And it would be idiotic trying to subject them all to the same levels of protection. The third proposal is where government agencies have negotiated framework contracts to whole sectors, perhaps the entire government sector. There is currently no required requirement to report what calls or bids are made under these contracts in a given year. That means that by the end of the year, we will not know if we put all the eggs in one and the same basket. This could easily be rectified. The fourth proposal I put forward is that it's really a reminder to government agencies, namely that as soon as government security is concerned, not just national security in the strict sense, there are special procedures for procurement that can be applied if one feels that more security could be availed in that manner. It's really a reminder to agencies saying, don't be afraid of the procurement rules. Like all rules, like all EU rules, they should be challenged from time to time. And why not in a court? Lastly, for any of these measures to make sense, both for the government and for business, the security dialogue between the public and the private sector must be enhanced and deepened and developed. That's the only way forward. Government cannot act in a vacuum when it comes to making references to standards that may make sense to government, but makes no sense to business. It must be a dialogue that precedes this. Many agencies and businesses will be greatly assisted by the GDPR and the NIS directive. It's going to force their hands, if they haven't done so already, to develop a more security-oriented culture when it comes to information security, guarding information within the agencies. But I think that if we want to move upwards on the Davos ranking, we need something more than that. We need to establish a culture among government agencies that risk assessments, that's not something you just leave with the IT department or the procurement lawyers in the agency. That's simply not enough. It is a management issue. It is really a boardroom issue. Currently, there's nothing that forces these issues. I'm heading a government agency. There's nothing that forces these issues under my nose when I sign off on the annual accounts. This could also be easily rectified, and I make proposals to that effect. So when it comes to risk assessment, we are really not there yet. And I will leave you with these reflections for starters. Thank you.
Thank you, Erik. So, hi everyone. My name is Erika Häger. I'm also a lawyer. I'm a partner with the Swedish law firm Mannheimer Swartling. I've been working with privacy for the past 17 years and am now heading a roughly 20-lawyer privacy team at the firm. I'm not here to comment on Transportgate from a legal perspective. I would like to try to address some issues from a more practical point of view. In particular, how Transportgate has had an impact on outsourcing on a more general level. And I would like to stress that there are many authorities and companies that are great in doing outsourcing. They know how to do it. But I do think that most of us, regardless of level of sophistication, there are still some lessons to be learned that we all can share and hopefully learn from. So how many of you do regularly outsource business processes or services within your companies? Quite a few. Because I think it's... I normally, when I speak about outsourcing, I think it's good to start by saying there's no legal definition of outsourcing. But I mean, typically we talk about a transfer of business functions from a company or authority to a third-party service provider. Sometimes it includes transfer of assets, employees, and it always involves the entering into some kind of service contract. It could be IT services, which would be like the traditional IT outsourcing, infrastructure, application management, support services, help desk services, etc. But it's frequently also more business process related services. Salary administration, call centers, financing, accounting services, facilities management services. Could be a whole range of different type of business processes. Often it's also combined with cloud services in one way or another, which could also raise specific issues, of course. I think it's important to know why you are outsourcing something. And I think this can be also something for a DPO to push within the organization. You need to understand what the drivers for outsourcing something is. And in doing that, I think it could be interesting to look at the typical advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are often what we call the business objectives of the outsourcing. Someone has decided there's a need to cut cost. Sometimes it's the driver would be to increase flexibility or increase efficiency or access skilled resources that you don't have within your own organization. Could also be a save on infrastructure, technology. Increased security could be a viable reason for outsourcing. It could also allow you as a company or organization to focus on organization. To a certain extent, you may lose control. There could be security risks. There could be public backlash, as we have seen in terms of Transportgate, of course. Hidden costs, quality issues are also pretty frequent disadvantages. And I think during the last couple of years, we've also seen a greater interest from regulators when it comes to outsourcing. And the reason for that are actually all of the above, I would say. So if we continue and look at Transportgate and see what are the lessons learned, what can we all do better when we are outsourcing on behalf of our organizations? I think there are 3 top issues. And the first one I would like to emphasize is the importance of being strategic. And of course, that sounds very normal, of course. But I've been in so many outsourcing negotiations where sometimes you talk to the deal team and they don't really know what the drivers are. And this is really the first thing. You need to decide, why do we want to do this? And Erik and I had a discussion about this, and I think it's important to understand, especially when it comes to IT. Historically, it was often, well, this is just an IT service. Let's have the IT people take care of this. But that's not the case anymore. IT is not a separate function within a company or organization. IT is integrated in the business. So regardless of what you're outsourcing, it will typically be involving IT in one way or another. And I could just emphasize what you said, Erik, that this makes outsourcing a boardroom issue. So be strategic, understand why you are doing this. Secondly, I would like to emphasize the importance of being on top of the legal requirements. And I think that's why we're here, right? We have seen the Transportgate. We have seen the importance of understanding Public Access to Information and Secrecy Act. We have seen the Protective Security Act. But I would also like to emphasize the importance of industry regulations. Some of you may come from the financial services sector, and there are numerous provisions to consider when outsourcing. If you're a bank or a financial institution, and you need to understand what that means. Can you outsource? Can you not outsource? Can you use a cloud when outsourcing? Many interesting issues to consider, and you need to be on top of those in order to make a successful outsourcing. And then, of course, we have the GDPR. That's also a set of rules but I'm sure you know all about that already. The third issue I would like to raise is also linked to what Erik already mentioned. Be risk conscious. Conduct your risk assessment. Know your information assets. You need to understand whether information that will be outsourced include confidential information, trade secrets, IP, business critical functions, and of course personal data. So I think those are the three, to me at least, three most important issues to learn from Transportgate. Be strategic, be on top of the legal requirements, and be risk conscious and conduct your risk assessments. Well, this is a privacy event, so I thought it was prudent to make a link also to the GDPR. So I was wondering, will the GDPR lead to better outsourcings? Everybody who thinks so, please raise your hand. Yeah, some of you. And surprisingly enough, I don't disagree. I do think so. I think that is a benefit of the GDPR, because I think this will force companies and authorities to make more thorough outsourcing processes, because you will have to address important issues in connection with outsourcing. For example, you will have to specify clear requirements on technical and organizational measures. That's a strict requirement under GDPR. You need to document processing activities. You need to conduct vendor due diligence to understand who will actually be holding your precious information. I think it's also fair to say that the GDPR will lead to an increase in communication and cooperation between the customer and the vendor, or the controller and the processor, to speak the GDPR language. You will have supply chain control, and you will have things like breach notification, which will trigger you to have an ongoing communication between controller and processor, which is a good thing, of course. And then finally, I think the GDPR will also trigger you to allocate risk of non-compliance. You will need to have the written agreement, the data processing agreement, which will be an integrated part of the outsourcing agreement. And in the data processing agreement, you will have interesting discussions about liability, indemnification, and outside the agreement, I think you will also see fruitful discussions about how can we ensure risk when it comes to liability and indemnities under the data processing agreements. So that was what I intended to talk about in terms of practical aspects of outsourcing. I think Transportgate has, to a certain extent, been a good thing for all of us, and I certainly think that the GDPR will help us in creating better outsourcing deals. Thank you.